Welcome to the 2020 Community Economic Development Funding Opportunity Announcement Pre-Application Presentation. This presentation provides prospective applicants of the Community Economic Development Program with details about the 2020 CED grant competition. Please note that we will be referring to the Community Economic Development Program as the CED program throughout this webinar. The 2020 CED Funding Opportunity Announcement, or FOA, is now available on the Administration for Children and Families Grants webpage. The Administration for Children and Families is also referred to as ACF in this presentation. The Office of Community Services, also known as OCS, wants to bring to your attention some important details about the 2020 CED grant competition. Each of these details, which are discussed in Section 4, Application and Submission Information, beginning on page 20 of the FOA, will be discussed in more detail in this presentation. ACF requires applications to be electronically submitted via grants.gov. The deadline for electronic application submission is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on July 3, 2020. The deadline for receipt of paper applications is 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time on this date. Keep in mind, to submit a paper application, you must obtain a waiver in advance. Each applicant may only upload 2 electronic files, one for the project description and another for the appendices. All project application materials must be included in these 2 files. Additional files that are loaded into grants.gov as part of the project description or the appendices, such as resumes, business plans, and site control, will be removed from the competitive review file and not reviewed by the panel. The exceptions to this are the standard forms and OMB approved forms, which will not be counted as additional files. Carefully note the file naming conventions required by grants.gov. Limit file names to 50 characters, which includes characters and spaces. Adobe Acrobat is compatible for use with grants.gov. However, we recommend using the grants.gov compatible version of Adobe Reader software. Read the troubleshooting page on grants.gov for more information. The Office of Community Services, also known as OCS, is excited to kick off the 2020 CED grant competition. The funding opportunity announcement is available on the ACF Grants webpage, the URL for which is listed on this slide. To start off today's presentation, we will talk a bit about the CED program. The CED program is described in Section 1, Program Description of the FOA, which begins on page 2. The purpose of the program is to create business development and employment opportunities in an effort to help low-income individuals achieve economic self-sufficiency. The CED program aims to contribute to community revitalization by providing grants to community development corporations, also known as CDCs, to support business startups or business expansions that result in the creation of full-time, permanent jobs for individuals with low incomes within low-income service areas. CED projects are expected to further the Department of Health and Human Services' goals of strengthening families and promoting self-sufficiency. On page 18, in Section 3, Eligibility Information, the FOA notes that in order to receive a grant award, applicants must be a private, nonprofit community development corporation, or CDC. The premise of the program is that nonprofit CDCs know their community and are poised to efficiently and effectively create new community economic development projects there. To be a qualified CDC, an applicant must meet and demonstrate all 3 of the following conditions. First, the applicant must be a private nonprofit CDC with 501c3. Second, the applicant must have articles of incorporation or bylaws demonstrating that the CDC has the principal purpose of the planning, developing, or managing of low-income housing or community economic development activities. And finally, the applicant's board of directors must have representation from each of the following: community residents, business leaders, and civic leaders. Community or faith-based organizations that meet these requirements are eligible to apply. The same statute applies to organizations regardless of whether they are faith-based. CED funds may be used for a variety of business startup or business expansion activities, as long as the expenditures result in the creation of positions that can be filled by individuals with low income. The support for a new or expanded business can be accomplished through the CDC using grant funds to become an equity partner or by providing loans. An equity investment may be either in a subsidiary for-profit corporation of the applicant or an unaffiliated business. If CED funding is used for lending, the CDC must ensure the business is viable. Loans must be at or below market rate. Repayment of all loans funded through CED funds must begin during the course of the funded project period, and balloon payments are not allowed. Please note that funding cannot be gifted or given as grants to another organization or business. More detail on eligible uses of funding can be found in the FOA in Section 1, Program Description, which begins on page 2. CED funds may be used for purchase of land, completing construction, or renovation of a property, as long as these activities contribute to the creation of new, permanent, full-time jobs. Properties that are constructed or renovated can use funding toward both hard or soft costs of the related development to the real property. Hard costs include capital costs related to the acquisition, construction, and/or alteration of renovation of real property, exclusive of related soft costs. Soft costs include appraisals, environmental reviews, and architectural and engineering services. Again, more detail on eligible uses of funding can be found in the FOA in Section 1, Program Description, which begins on page 2. CED funds may not be used for reimbursement of pre-award costs, such as paying an individual or company to write an application. Additionally, CED funds cannot be used for the following: to provide subawards or pass-throughs, to capitalize loan loss reverse funds, to fund loans with balloon payments, to fund loans where repayment does not begin during the funded project period, to fund projects designed to primarily support training and technical assistance centers. Keep in mind, limited job training and job placement activities can be supported if they are provided specifically for the new positions created. For example, funds can be used to train a cashier for a specific position that has been created, but cannot be used to operate a general job training and placement program. Finally, ineligible activities include projects that do not create new jobs that did not exist prior to the proposed CED project. Section 1 Program Description includes information on ineligible activities beginning on page 6. CED funded projects can be construction or non-construction projects. For both types of projects in the business plan, the applicant must demonstrate a clear separation of construction and non-construction activities. Each, if applicable, must include a realistic project plan with a timeline that clearly indicates that the project will be complete and all CED funding will be expended within the grant period. Applicants should also refer to the application checklist, which is presented in Section 8, for more information on what forms are required for construction and non-construction projects under this FOA. For non-construction projects, the grant period is 3 years. It is expected that non-construction projects will support practicing business expansion and/or creation and job creation be completed and CED funds expended within the 3-year project period. Applicants must demonstrate in the business plan that non-construction projects will be ready to implement at the time of grant award through lending guidelines, sample loan agreements, commitments from identified participating businesses, and a realistic project plan. Non-construction projects involve limited construction or alteration and renovation of real property costing $150,000 or less to support participating business creation, expansion, and/or job creation. Non-construction projects typically involve a loan or equity investment in participating businesses. Applicants proposing non-construction projects must propose to create at least a minimum number of jobs using the following formula. The total amount of federal CED funds awarded divided by $20,000 equals the minimum number of jobs to be created for a non-construction project. For example, if a grantee is awarded $800,000 in federal CED funds, it must use that money to conduct activities that will create at least 40 new full-time permanent jobs. We got to 40 jobs by dividing 800,000 by 20,000. For construction projects, the grant period is 5 years. It is expected that non-construction projects will support participating business expansion and/or creation and job creation be completed and CED funds expended within the 5-year project period. They must be ready to implement at the time of award. Construction projects involve construction or alteration and renovation of real property exceeding $150,000. Construction projects typically include commercial real estate for lease or use by the gamut of small and large-scale business operations. The CED program permits facility construction as needed to support participating business creation, expansion, and/or job creation. Applicants proposing construction projects must propose to create at least the minimum of jobs using the following formula. The total amount of federal CED funds awarded divided by $25,000 equals the minimum number of jobs to be created for construction projects. For example, if a grantee is awarded $800,000 in federal CED funds, it must use that money to conduct activities that will create at least 32 new full-time permanent jobs. We got 32 jobs by dividing 800,000 by 25,000. For the purpose of this FOA, any project with construction activities will be considered a construction project. However, prospective applicants are urged to read the federal requirements related to real property in this FOA carefully, as those apply to all projects where CED funds are used for construction activities. It is important to note that short-term construction jobs associated with preparing for participating business setup or expansion are not counted when determining the number of jobs created under the CED program, as they are designed to be temporary. For ACF property-related policy and guidance, please refer to the ACF website. Prospective applicants should also note the important post-award requirements outlined in Section 6.3, beginning on page 68. Recipients of funding under the CED program are required to submit performance progress and financial reports periodically throughout their project period. These forms include Performance Progress Report, or the PPR, which is submitted semi-annually throughout the project to report on key outcomes of the project, including businesses created and expanded, jobs created, and funds leveraged. It is submitted through the Grant Solutions online data collection system. Financial reports, which are also submitted semi-annually and is how you will report expenditures and federal transactions. Additionally, it is expected that, for all facility-related projects, the applicable OMB-approved SF429 forms will be submitted along with the supporting documents in the Grant Solutions OLDC system. Depending on the nature of your project, you may also be required to submit one or more additional forms. More information on what forms need to be submitted and when will be provided upon receiving the award. Grantees using federal funding for construction, renovations, or to acquire a facility or land for the project must file a Notice of Federal Interest, also known as an NFI. After the award is granted, an OCS program specialist will work with you on calculating the federal share of real property. Please keep in mind, for the purposes of this FOA, any project with construction activities as defined in the FOA will be considered a construction project. Additionally, short-term construction projects associated with preparing for participating business startup or expansion are not counted when determining the number of jobs created under the CED project, as they are designed to be temporary. Applicants are encouraged to read the federal requirements related to real property in this FOA very carefully, as they apply to all projects where CED funds are used for construction activities. This information can be found on page 4 in the FOA. For ACF property-related policy and guidance, please refer to the ACF website listed on this slide. As noted in Section 2 Federal Award Information on page 17 of the FOA, for fiscal year 2020, there are $13.6 million available to fund CED projects. The maximum award level for individual CED projects this year is $800,000. The length of each project, also known as the project period, is 36 months for non-construction related projects and 60 months for construction related projects. OCS anticipates funding approximately 17 CED projects for fiscal year 2020. Now we will discuss some of the general format requirements for submitting an application for a CED grant. It is very important to read Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, which begins on page 21 of the FOA, very closely. All applications must be submitted electronically using grants.gov. If you do not have an internet connection or the computing capacity to upload large files, then you must request and obtain an exemption to submit a paper application prior to the closing date. At the end of Section 4.2, see the section on Request an Exemption from Required Electronic Application Submission for more details on requesting an exemption. Keep in mind, there may be some differences in application formatting and submission requirements for paper applications, so pay close attention to the requirements in the FOA. For this webinar, we will focus on the requirements for electronic applications. All applications, both paper and electronic, must be double-spaced and use 12-point font in Times New Roman, except for footnotes, which may be 10-point Times New Roman. The parts of the application that may have different formatting requirements are listed on the slide and will be highlighted throughout the presentation. All applicants must submit and upload all required elements and supporting documentation in 2 files, the project description and the appendices. All submissions, inclusive of the project description and the appendices, are limited to 200 pages total. Details about the items included in the project description and appendices can be found in Section 4.2, Page Limitations and Content for All Submission Formats, which begins on page 23 of the FOA. These 2 files and page limitations do not include standard forms or OMB approved forms. An example of such a form is the SF424. These forms will be submitted separately as directed in the online system. This includes HUD certification of consistency with Promise Zone Goals and Implementation form. Applications with additional files will be amended and files will be removed from the review. It is recommended that applicants use Adobe PDF to electronically combine documents instead of scanning multiple documents into one manually. We have also provided a resource on this slide which provides instructions and guidance on converting and combining files via grants.gov. In the next 2 slides, we will discuss the details of what these 2 files must include. As noted on page 23 of the FOA, in Section 4.2, Page Limitations and Content for All Submission Formats, the project description file must include the items presented on this slide. All items must be labeled, numbered, and organized clearly in the table of contents. Keep in mind, this is the narrative for your application and it may include references to supporting documentation that may be included in the Appendices file. In such instances, applicants should provide clearer references using item name, location, and project numbers. For example, you may include a summary of the market analysis in the project description file, but the actual market research and data may be included in the Appendices file. As noted on page 23 of the FOA, in section 4.2, page limitations and content for all submission formats, the Appendices file must include the items presented on this slide. All items must be labeled, numbered, and organized clearly in the table of contents. Keep in mind, all submissions, inclusive of the project description and the appendices, which we will cover next, are limited to 200 pages. It is extremely important for applicants to read this year's FOA very closely and submit all of the required information and forms outlined in the announcement. This information determines an applicant's eligibility for CED grant funding. If applicants fail to include any of the requested information, it will reduce or eliminate their chance of receiving a CED grant. Additionally, it is strongly encouraged that applicants review the definition of terms and utilize the checklist provided in the funding opportunity announcement to ensure all required materials have been submitted. Applicants can find the definition of terms in section 1 of the FOA on page 6 and the checklist in section 8, beginning on page 70. Now we will discuss in more detail each of the components of a CED application by reviewing section 5.1, which begins on page 55 of the FOA. This section provides a description of how reviewers will review and score applications. When putting an application together, you want to refer to this section focusing on evaluation criteria, as well as corresponding language in section 4.2, content and form of application submission, which begins on page 21 of the FOA. Section 4.2, content and form of application submission, page 21 of the FOA, provides detailed instructions on how to put an application together. The first part of the application should be the project summary or abstract. It should be one single space page in Times New Roman 12-point font. Please place the following at the top of the abstract: project title, applicant name, address, contact phone number, email address, website address if applicable. The project summary should include a brief description of the proposed project and proposed services, community needs and barriers, target populations, service area demographics, project feasibility, and bonus points eligibility. The project description in section 4.2, content and form of application submission, provides a summary of application requirements. In section 5.1, criteria, provides the information on how each criteria is evaluated and ranked in competition with other applications for available assistance. A listing of the 9 evaluation criteria and additional bonus criteria are presented on this slide. Please remember that while you know you have a great project, how the project is described and supporting evidence in the application package is extremely important. While we ask you to be concise, you also have to provide enough information for reviewers who know community development but who do not know your challenges or your community are provided enough details to see the success of this project in a very short time period. More will be said on the review process in later slides. We will now review the evaluation criteria. In reviewing the objectives and need for assistance section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the project's goals and location are aligned with the program's intent, and the extent to which the application establishes a clear need for the project to achieve these goals, as outlined in the relevant subsections under section 4.2 of the FOA. Specifically, as noted on page 55, under section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, in reviewing the objectives and needs for assistance section, reviewers will consider the extent to which The application demonstrates that the construction or non-construction project's goals and objectives for participant business development, job creation, and contribution to community revitalization align with community economic development efforts in the local community and with the goals and objectives of the CED program. The application demonstrates that the project is needed to create or expand participating businesses and create new jobs, provide jobs in the community that low-income people can get and keep, and address barriers to self-sufficiency that are insufficiently addressed by other organizations and projects in the area. The application identifies ways in which the project can help address personal and community barriers that prevent individuals with low incomes from successfully obtaining and holding jobs or creating successful businesses in the community to be served. The application demonstrates that the proposed project will meet the program's objectives by successfully serving individuals with low incomes through the creation of employment and business opportunities within the project service area. The application provides recent evidence published within the past 5 years from U.S. Census updates and other statistics published by federal, state, county, city, and other government bodies that both the unemployment rate and the poverty rate within the project service area are equal to or greater than the state or national level. The business plan is broken down into 5 different criteria: project viability, project implementation, barrier reduction to help employees achieve self-sufficiency, past performance with similar job creation projects, organizational capacity. The total point value for this section is 65 points. The point values for each subsection under the business plan are listed on this slide. In reviewing project viability, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the project has a high likelihood of success in terms of business and job creation, and is well planned and ready to be implemented at the time of the award, as outlined in the relevant subsections under Section 4.2 of the FOA. Specifically, as noted beginning on page 56 under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, in reviewing the project viability section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application provides a clear, well-conceived overall approach to the project, with a sound implementation plan that is consistent with the expectations described in this FOA, describes how needs and proposed solutions to the identified barriers within the community will be assessed in order to demonstrate that the project will create positions that help address unmet needs, and includes a realistic quarterly timeline with specific milestones to be achieved. The application explains the basis for projected business earnings of participating businesses, including demonstrating financial feasibility through pro formas, profit and loss statements, sources and uses of fund statements, cash flow statements, and balance sheets from the businesses that will be creating jobs. The application provides recent market research and industry data published within the past 5 years that identifies critical industry risks and demonstrates that the project will create positions in an industry with viable short and long-term outlooks. The application provides recent market research and industry data published within the past 5 years that indicates that the participating businesses will be viable in terms of competition, anticipated market, customer base, and market trends. The application includes a sound and feasible recruitment strategy and tracking system to obtain and document referrals of low-income individuals for employment in at least 75% of the jobs created for the project. The application includes signed agreements with social service providers, for example, TANF, child support, etc., that demonstrate partnerships to obtain referrals of low-income individuals for employment. Indicates that positions will be sustained for at least 1 year after the end of the grant period. The application describes how any confidential or sensitive information, such as background investigations, from staff or project participants and/or project beneficiaries will be collected and protected during the course of the project, and how this information will be disposed of after the grant has ended. Next is the project implementation section under the business plan, which is worth 20 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that all necessary resources will be available to implement the project at the time of the award as outlined in the relevant subsection under Section 4.2 of the FOA. Specifically, as noted beginning on page 57 under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that all of the activities to be funded by the award are necessary for the success of the project and are consistent with the project's scope, scale, and projected outcomes. The application identifies how the proposed project is aligned with local and/or regional community, economic, and/or workforce development strategies, and addresses barriers outlined in the application. The application demonstrates that the staffing, facilities, equipment, supplies, and funding to support each activity have been identified and are reasonable. The application identifies any competing activities being undertaken by the applicant or project partners that might reduce the availability of resources for this project. The application demonstrates that the applicant is in control of the site and facilities necessary for the success of the project, or that site control is conditioned only on the receipt of the grant award. Documentation demonstrating site control must include specific property location, for example, address, city, and state, and be in the form of a signed and dated deed or lease agreement between the applicant and property owner, or documentation in the agreement of the terms of the agreement, use of premises, and description of the site. The application identifies staff that will be responsible for maintaining oversight of program activities, staff, and partners, and describes the procedures and policies used to oversee staff and/or partners and contractors. In reviewing the project implementation section, reviewers will also consider the extent to which, for projects with equity or stock investments, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application identifies the investment and demonstrates that an equity stock investment agreement with a participating business includes the following: an explanation of the purposes for which the applicant will make an equity stock investment, the type of equity stock transaction, for example, stock purchase, the cost per share and the basis upon which the applicant derived the cost per share, the number of shares the applicant will purchase, the percentage of applicant ownership in the business, the term and duration of the agreement, and information regarding compliance concerning intangible property. For projects with loans, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application describes the initial loans to be made from the grant, including the name of the specific participating businesses receiving the loans, the types of businesses, and the business development plans. Information regarding compliance with all terms and conditions of the grant award, and draft copies of the loan agreements, which include elements outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form Application Submission, the project description, business plan, project implementation. The application describes strategies to ensure that all businesses, either initial loans or subsequent future loans, will go to eligible recipients for business development activities. The application demonstrates that repayment will begin during the course of the funded project period, and that a balloon payment, if any, will be made before the end of the project. The application describes how the construction and non-construction activities are separated. Next is the barrier reduction to help employees achieve self-sufficiency section, which is worth 10 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the applicant demonstrate sound and reasonable financial strategies that have a high likelihood of leading to the success of the project as outlined in the relevant subsections under 4.2 of the FOA. Specifically, as noted beginning on page 58 under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application includes the number and types of new, permanent, full-time positions that will be created and demonstrates that it will allow families to achieve self-sufficiency by providing competitive starting wages. To demonstrate that wages will support families in achieving self-sufficiency, the application should clearly identify wages that will be paid to those who fill the positions created by the participating businesses. Present data published within the past 5 years by a reputable source that illustrates the wages to be paid are adequate for family self-sufficiency with the geographic area in which the businesses will be located. The application provides evidence of the leave policies of participating businesses, and that these policies clearly demonstrate that paid leave is provided to those who fill the positions created by the participating businesses. The application includes detailed descriptions of the benefits that will be provided to employees of participating businesses. Such benefits could include health insurance, retirement benefits, transit benefits, childcare, and other fringe benefits. The application describes how the participating businesses will support individuals with low incomes in achieving career growth and advancement, including any training, educational, or certification opportunities employees will be provided by participating businesses or other project partners. The application clearly describes the scheduling policies of participating businesses and that these policies indicate that participating businesses will provide sufficient, stable, and predictable working hours and/or flexibility needed to care for family members, pursue training or educational opportunities, and address other personal matters. The next criterion is past performance with similar projects, which is worth 5 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the applicant has past experience with similar projects as outlined in the relevant subsection under Section 4.2 of the FOA. Specifically, as noted on page 59 under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the applicant and all partner organizations have the experience necessary to successfully carry out the proposed project, including evidence of 2 business creation or business expansion projects undertaken by the applicant that have been executed within the past 10 years are substantially similar to the project for which CED funding is being requested and were successful in creating sustainable full-time, full-year positions. The application provides a quantitative and qualitative description of the jobs created through past business creation or expansion projects. This should include descriptions of the positions created, including information on wages and benefits, descriptions of how the jobs allowed persons to leave public assistance programs or similar supports, and information on the long-term sustainability of the positions created. Next, we have the organizational capacity section, which is worth 10 points. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the organization, staff, and project partners have sufficient and overall experience to carry out the project as outlined in the relevant subsections under Section 4.2 of the FOA. Specifically, as noted beginning on page 59 under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the organization, its staff, and its project partners have sufficient overall experience to successfully implement the proposed project, including relevant experience and success in developing and operating businesses similar to those to be conducted under the proposed project. If one or more project partners are involved, the application demonstrates that the combined capacity of the applicant and the partner organizations is sufficient to successfully implement the proposed project. The board of directors for the governing organization includes representation from the community in which the proposed project will be located. The application includes a resolution, meeting minutes, or other documentation demonstrating that the majority of the board directors has granted board approval for the proposed project. For applicants that cannot demonstrate substantial experience with economic development projects similar to those proposed in the application, the extent to which the application provides evidence of a viable partnership with a more experienced partner, including evidence of a workable strategy for the more experienced partner as defined in Section 1 Program Description, to provide the administrative, technical, and/or financial technical assistance needed to ensure the success of the project. The application includes signed agreements that clearly outline the role of the project partner and describes the relationship between the applicant and the project partner. Demonstrate that all project partners that will be responsible for directly or indirectly spending CED funds are financially viable and have the capacity to responsibly manage any federal funds awarded under the application through a financial management system that complies with the terms and conditions of the grant award and other requirements outlined in Section 4.2, Content and Form of Application Submission, the Project Description, Business Plan, Organizational Profile. The application demonstrates through biographical sketches, degree information, resumes, and descriptions of previous project experience that the identified staff are qualified to carry out the proposed project. Resumes should be no more than 2 pages in length and identify staff % of time available for the project. The application demonstrates that key staff have the appropriate time commitment available and experience in supervision, finance, and business development and management, and working with the target population. The discussion of staff experience must be sufficiently detailed to allow reviewers to assess whether individual skills and experience demonstrate an ability to fulfill the tasks assigned to them. The application clearly states whether all key project staff positions are filled. In cases where a key staff person has not yet been hired, the application demonstrates that an appropriate position description, recruitment strategy, and estimated hiring timeline have been developed. Letters of support is the next criterion. In reviewing this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates sufficient public support to successfully carry out the project as outlined in the relevant subsection under Section 4.2 of the FOA. Specifically, as noted beginning on page 61 under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application includes letters of support from local or regional government agencies or community organizations that describes any specific relationship the supporter has to the applicant, knowledge of the applicant's experience and qualifications in business and job creation, and any in-kind or financial contributions to the project, if applicable. In reviewing the budget and budget justification, which is worth 20 points, reviewers will consider the extent to which the budget for the project demonstrates that the applicant has sufficient funds available and that the planned expenditures are necessary, appropriate, and reasonable for the success of the project as outlined in the relevant subsections under Section 4.2 of the FOA. Please note that applicants must forecast their cash needs over the project period on the Federal Assistance Form, SF 424A, Sections D and E. As noted on page 61, under Application Review Information of the FOA, reviewers will specifically consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that the amount of funds available for the project, CED and non-CED, is commensurate with the level of effort necessary to accomplish the activities, goals, and objectives of the project. The application clearly demonstrates that the financial estimates are grounded in solid assumptions and demonstrates the necessity, reasonableness, and allocation of the proposed costs. The application includes a budget and budget justification that clearly links the proposed expenditures to the proposed activities necessary for accomplishing the project. The application's budget narrative demonstrates in sufficient detail for a reviewer to evaluate the appropriateness and reasonableness of the line items proposed, that the proposed budget is appropriate for accomplishing the proposed project. The application provides sources and uses of funds, documentation for both CED and non-CED funding sources, if applicable, necessary to implement the project, along with an itemization of expenses by funding source. In reviewing the project budget and budget justification section, reviewers will also consider the extent to which the application budget demonstrates program income is not necessary to meet the funding needs of implementation of the project design. The application convincingly demonstrates that the CED cost per position created is equal to or less than the ratio found by dividing the request award amount by $25,000 for construction projects or $20,000 for non-construction projects. The application includes a plan that demonstrates the applicant's capacity to responsibly manage the proposed federal funds and to adequately protect any federal funds awarded under the application through a financial management system. The application demonstrates that the budget includes funds for all required items, including travel for one staff member to attend a training and technical assistance conference in Washington, D.C. during each year of the grant, and if the applicant is partnering with an experienced CDC, funds to cover the cost of this support, for example, travel costs, payments to cover staff time, etc. For projects that involve non-CED funding to carry out the project, reviewers will also consider the extent to which the application provides evidence that all capital requirements have been met through financing, cash resources, or in-kind contributions. The application demonstrates evidence, for example, signed commitment letters, of unconditional commitments for loans, municipal, federal, or state tax credits, equity stock investments, or other supporting grants totaling at least the amount of non-CED funds necessary. The application provides evidence, for example, a financial statement of cash available, of the applicant's ability to contribute any non-CED cash resources that are needed for the project and that the applicant has pledged in support of the project. The application provides evidence of in-kind contributions of personal property, and a demonstration for the value of these contributions was established through techniques such as an inventory valuation for equipment and/or a certified appraisal for real property. For projects with only CED funding, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates the applicant's ability to carry out a successful project and accomplish its goal with only CED funds. For construction projects, reviewers will consider the extent to which the application demonstrates that financial plans include all construction costs and that costs are appropriately justified as reasonable and necessary to carry out the activities proposed in the application. To evaluate the project integration criterion, which is worth 5 points, reviewers will consider the extent to which all of the application criteria elements are aligned. For example, this section would determine how effectively the need for assistance, objectives, business plan, and project budget and budget justification all fit together. This criterion does not measure any element of the application in isolation. It is used to assess how well all components of the application relate to each other to form a cohesive, carefully planned project. As noted beginning on page 62 under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, to evaluate this section, reviewers will consider the extent to which There are no significant incongruences between any sections of the application that need to be resolved prior to effective project implementation. The completion of the project will effectively lead to creation or expansion of businesses and result in the creation of the jobs proposed in the application. The applicant demonstrated that creation and/or expansion of participating businesses and the creation of these jobs will address the issues and barriers identified in the objectives and needs for assistance criterion. The applicant clearly described a logical approach with a realistic timeframe and identified the resources necessary to achieve the project goals proposed in the application. The budget expenditure closely correlates with the objectives and activities proposed in the business plan. The last element we will discuss are the 5 opportunities for bonus points. This includes alignment with the Opportunity Zones Initiative, CED project located in rural communities with high rates of poverty, unemployment, and substance abuse disorder, project located in a county with persistent poverty, alignment with the Promise Zones Initiative, state and trust territories without active CED grants. Note that Opportunity Zones have now been designated in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 territories, and bonus points are awarded to projects aligned with the Opportunity Zones Initiative. To receive credit, applicants must identify the opportunity zone that will benefit the CED project. A link is provided in the FOA to the U.S. Treasury Department's list of designated opportunity zones. Each opportunity is worth 2 points. More information on how reviewers will evaluate bonus points can be found under Section 5, Application Review Information of the FOA, beginning on page 63. Now we will discuss the process for submitting your CED application. More information on the process is found in Section 4, Application and Submission Information, beginning on page 20 of the FOA. Applications must be received by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on July 3, 2020. Applications submitted after this deadline will not be reviewed. In addition, all organizations must have a valid Data Universal Number System or DUNS number, and you must update your registration within the System for Award Management, or SAM, formerly the Central Contractor Registry, annually. Applicants, both new and existing, are strongly encouraged to review this information well in advance of the application deadline, as we will not be able to extend the deadline and you will not be able to apply without a valid DUNS number. Applications are required to be submitted electronically at grants.gov. Applicants submitting applications electronically do not need to provide additional copies of their application materials. Electronically submitted applications will be considered late and disqualified if the date or timestamp is after 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on July 3, 2020. Detailed instructions on submitting applications electronically are available on the grants.gov website. All applications must complete 3 registrations in order to submit a grant application: DUNS number registration, SAM.gov registration, and grants.gov registration. Please note that the registration process for grants.gov can take up to 5 days, so all applicants, both new and existing, are strongly encouraged to review this information well in advance of the application deadline. Applications submitted by an authorized organizational representative, or AOR, that do not have current registration with the System for Award Management SAM will be rejected by grants.gov. For detailed guidance on how to register and update registration for all 3 systems, please visit the Register and Get Ready resource available on the ACF website at the URL listed on this slide. If you encounter any trouble submitting your application, you must obtain a ticket number directly from the grants.gov help desk. A ticket number is required for all waiver requests. ACF may extend an application due date and receipt time when circumstances such as natural disasters occur, when there are widespread disruptions of mail service, or other rare cases. The determination to extend or waive due date and receipt time requirements rests with the ACF's Chief Grants Management Officer. Applicants are required to submit applications electronically unless they have received an exemption in writing from the ACF Grants Officer. Details about how to obtain waivers are described in the announcement under Section 4.2. If a waiver is granted, hard copy applications are due at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Refer to the announcement for the address to submit applications. Again, more information on the process is found in Section 4, Application and Submission Information, beginning on page 20 of the FOA. Now we will discuss the details of the application review process. The FOA discusses the application review process in Section 5.2, Review and Selection Process, which begins on page 65. Every application received from a qualified CDC will be reviewed if it is submitted on time and is not over the maximum funding level of $800,000. No more than 2 files will be provided to the panel to read and review. Once an application passes the initial screening, it will be reviewed and scored based on its responsiveness to the evaluation criteria in Section 5 of the FOA. It will be reviewed and scored by a panel composed of non-federal community economic development professionals and other social service professionals. The application will be reviewed for content completeness. Therefore, a very important aspect of the application is the inclusion of all documentation needed to support written statements. The easiest way to make certain your organization is covering all of the bases is by submitting all of the elements in the application checklist presented in Section 8, Other Information of the Funding Opportunity Announcement. Again, more detail on the application review process can be found in the FOA in Section 5.2, Review and Selection Process, which begins on page 65. Highly ranked applications are not guaranteed funding. Reviewer scores weigh heavily in funding decisions, but are not the only factor considered. There are several other important factors also taken into consideration. The FOA includes several factors ACF and OCS will consider when making awards. The OCS director has discretion to make all final funding decisions. Again, the FOA discusses the application review process in full detail in Section 5.2, Review and Selection Process, which begins on page 65. All applicants who are funded will be notified by email no later than September 29, 2020 from Grant Solutions. Grant Solutions is a comprehensive grants management system provided by the Grant Center of Excellence. Applicants who are not awarded a grant will receive an email from the OCS Operations Center with a copy of the panel's comments about the strengths and weaknesses of their application. While your project might have been very good, OCS only has enough funding to grant awards to a small percentage of applicants. More on the award process can be found in Section 6, Federal Award Administration Information of the FOA, which begins on page 67. Page 70 of the FOA includes several reference websites that may be of use in putting together an application. These websites are listed on this slide. This concludes our webinar on the 2020 CED funding announcement.